I find it really interesting that on Ash Wednesday, we get the particular gospel reading that we just read, where we're basically told not to do anything as a show to other people. So we're supposed to pray and fast and do acts of charity as almost in secret, in private. And then it's kind of funny, I think, that then we put ashes on our forehead and sometimes talk with each other about what we're giving up for Lent or what we're going to fast from. And the two things have always seemed a little bit at odds with each other for me. So it was really interesting for me to kind of look into this passage a little bit more for today and to think about, why do we have this kind of instruction and yet still get away with doing Ash Wednesday the way that we do? And I think part of the key to it is looking just a few verses earlier from Matthew's 5th chapter. And in Matthew 5, Jesus goes through the Beatitudes, and then he calls people to shine their light before others. And so that also seems like a contrast to shine your light before others, but don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Or do this in secret, and your Father who is in secret will know that you're doing these things. And I think when we look at these two passages, I think we see that Jesus is actually talking about two different things. There are times when our faith should be expressed in a more public fashion, when the way that we live should be like a light shining out to the nations or shining out to people around us. In the Old Testament, we get that a lot. We get different passages that tell us about how the people of Israel were supposed to be a light to the nation, almost like a beacon that would welcome other nations to come and follow them. That's why we have the 10 Commandments. That was God setting guidelines for right living that would not only help the Israelites in their relationships with each other and be able to live together, but it would also help them set an example to the nations around them of what life could be like when you followed certain rules. And Isaiah 63, verse 3 says, "Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn." And in these passages, light is usually designating a kind of behavior, a way of living that attracts. Another example that I could think of is in the New Testament, in Acts, when the church is just formed, and it's the generosity of the Christian believers, it's the way that they interact with each other. That's what really brings other people into their midst. That's what makes other people curious about Christianity. So I think, yes, there are times when we are to practice our faith in a public way, when we show self-control, when we love others. But I think on the flip side, this public faith, this kind of the way we treat others, the way we express our faith publicly, can only be real and can only bear fruit if we also have a strong private faith, if our private faith is well nurtured. And today's passage is addressing what should be private aspects of our faith: prayer, acts of charity, and fasting. Prayer, charity, and fasting are meant to be things that we do when we're alone, or that we do for ourselves and God, just thinking about that relationship, not thinking about what other people might think of us while we're doing these things. They involve our relationship with God, and the point of them is really to bring us closer to God in those actions. And that's why Jesus suggests going into a closet to pray. The storeroom in Palestinian homes would have been the only room with a lock on it. And so Jesus acknowledges that sometimes in a busy household, the only way you're going to get peace is to go into some place where the door locks. And that's where you can pray in private. I remember house sitting for a couple, and the dog was very enthusiastic. And anytime you had a meal, the dog was right there trying to get at you. And I remember them telling me that the previous person who house sat for them would go to the bathroom and lock the door and eat their meals in the bathroom. I wasn't quite prepared to do that. I locked the dog in the bathroom and had my meal in the kitchen. But But it's that kind of acknowledgement that sometimes we need that place apart, that private place to pray, where no one's going to interrupt, where no one's going to barge in. And so Jesus suggests that praying in a place by ourselves is a good habit to have, and is a way to build that relationship with God. And what also this passage is saying is, of course, is that when we pray, when we fast, when we do acts of charity, we're not doing them for show. We aren't meant to impress anyone with how pious we are. Frederick Bruner states that righteousness that is overly conscious of itself, or love impressed with its sacrifice, or mercy seeking attention, or purity done for show, all of these things are in fact unrighteous. Our demonstrations of faith are meant to blend into who we are. So we show through our simple everyday actions, through the people that we are, through our interactions with those around us on a regular basis. That's the place where we show the private faith that we've been nurturing. So what that means is that if we're not spending time alone with God, if we're not spending some time doing without the things that we think we need, or if we're not spending some time considering how we can serve others, then how we interact with others on a more public scale, when we have conversations with people, when we're going about our daily lives, that gets affected, and sometimes not in great ways. And I think what this means is that when we think to ourselves, have I really represented my love for God today in the things that I've done or in the words I've spoken? What is the answer to that question? Our demonstration of faith is meant to be part of our lives. And I think that this is actually much harder than saying, oh, I'm just going to go in a closet to pray, or I'm just going to fast, or I'm just... This actual, reflecting on how this is portrayed in our life is a bit more challenging. For example, it makes us think of, how did I speak to the person who irritated me today? Was I showing God's love in that moment? Have I really shown that I'm a follower of Jesus when I interacted with the driver who honked at me, or the clerk who got my order wrong, or my husband who took the car when I needed it? All those things kind of play into how our private faith is nurturing us. And it's a challenge then to ask ourselves, is our private faith really playing into our public faith, and in what way? And all of a sudden, it seems like when we think about those things, we have a bit more work and a bit more prayer and a bit more fasting to do to get to where we should be. Stanley Hauerwas notes on this passage that it matters not only that we follow Jesus, but how we follow Jesus is so critical for what it means to be his visible people. So yes, we need time alone to fast, to pray, to figure out what we can do for others so that we can shine as lights and not grow dim and fade out. And we also need that private time to reflect in our public lives. And the interesting thing about having these private practices is that we're told that God sees us doing them and will honor our efforts. God notices us. And what I love about this is that, and Frederick Bruner points this out, he notes that Jesus understands human nature's desire to be noticed. I think the whole reason we have social media is because people want to be noticed. And even if we would rather be in the background, and even if we are the kind of people that don't really want a lot of attention or a lot of notice, at some point we want somebody to see us on some level. And Jesus acknowledges that in us. And he doesn't say that we should never seek to be noticed, but rather that we should seek to be noticed by God and not by others. Again, Frederick Bruner notes, Jesus counsels us to make it our ambition to be a success before the Father, to impress him, to accumulate rewards and treasures of his notice and esteem. So when we lock ourselves in a room to pray, or when we set a quiet time apart to be with God, or when we help someone out without anyone else noticing, or when we decide to give up something that we thought we couldn't do without, God knows about these things, and he takes delight in them. he's kind of like a parent who sees their kid doing something good without being prompted and is like, wow, they've got it. I think God feels the same way with us. When we do these things, he takes pleasure in it. He notices. And this notice, the notice that we receive from God, frees us from the striving that we have in us. It frees us from that need to be noticed by someone or something. Hauerwas also notes that Jesus wants to liberate us from having to be impressive to anyone, including ourselves. So by looking for God to notice us, it means that that should be our main goal, our main aim. It means that we don't have to try to impress other people, and we don't have to try to impress ourselves. If we impress God, that's what really matters. And that's a hard one. I think that's a really hard thing to take away from this passage. So today we receive ashes in a public way to publicly admit that we have not been the lights we may have hoped to have been. We've flickered, maybe sometimes we've even gone out. So we humble ourselves before God and before each other. We express our frailty, our inability to do good without God. We cannot just simply rely on our own willpower and just get through hard times or power through aspects of our spiritual life. We may fast, we may pray so that we can get right with God, to be filled once again by God's Spirit, and to try once more. And in this service, we're reminded that we are dust. We are nothing without God's breath on us. And that breath is waiting to breathe new life into us through times of prayer, through acts of charity, and through letting go of things that we hold on too tightly. So we are to have both a private and a public faith. Our public faith shows the qualities that we develop through our private faith. And so in this Lent, as we try to practice a holy Lent, may our practices of private faith bring us the reward of being close to God, and in that closeness, may our light shine out. Amen.